I wouldn't want that piece of rubbish.
So when I bought this, the guy had, I said to him, does it run? He said yes. Turns it on for me, and he was doing like quick bursts, like flick flick, and he's going like, see, it works. You could hear it going zzz, and then he turned it off. And he goes, and if you ever have any problems, all you do is undo this and you put the blade back on. All right, which let's cover here. Okay, so you loosen that off, that winds that down, you pop your blade back on. Now, I get it home, first thing I want to do is test it out, and poof, blade pops off. Alright, and he goes, one of the things, like, because the blade is getting old, maybe the first thing you do is replace the blade. So I'm thinking, oh well, it's a blade issue, so I go down, I buy a new blade, I run it for a few seconds, blade comes off. I'm like, why is this doing this? So when the blade did pop off and I was just running it on these, blade was still coming off. So I took these off, and because I have the lathe, I'll show you on the bottom one. I noticed that in here the taper was tapering off this way, and I'm thinking, well, obviously it may have gotten a bit of wear over the time. So I put this on the lathe and I remachined it flush and put them back on, still doing it. I'm like, oh no. So I put a slight taper going towards the back, and I also took the motor off, and because it's got an adjustment on there too, and I put a bit of a kick in it this way, and put it on both pulleys, and not a problem. And then as soon as I put it through here, because you can notice that it's got to come around and then twist, so I put them through there, and as soon as I got it running, poof, blade plops off. I'm like, oh my god, what do I do now? So one of the first things I looked at was there was a huge gap in where the bearings are, and this helps it keeps it tight. It keeps it tight on the blade, and what it does is, sometimes you might get a flex in the blade, so it kind of keeps it straight. And when you undo these have, like, the way that the insert is, like, there's got an insert in there that you can kind of turn slightly, and they bring it, from close to far away. So I moved them around and I got it all perfect, and was still, the alignment seemed a lot better, because you can adjust those up here as well. They got the same style sleeve in there, that one side is slightly egg shaped, was how I'm going to put it. And so I had to make my own tool up, so that I loosen this off, and then I get my adjustments in there to move it around. Okay, so I've done all this, and blade's still coming off, and I was pulling my hair out, and I'm like, I'm gonna sell this thing. But I kept coming back towards it, and I noticed that these bearings that I adjusted earlier, when they were on there, they were on a slight angle going downwards. All right, and I'm like, well, that's while the blade's running this way, blade hits those bearings and it's guiding it off, like it's pushing it down. All right, and so what I had to do is I put a little spacer in behind here, because you can see that these are slightly bent, and even though that I bent them up, they tend to go back to where they were machined to. even on this side, you can see the packing in behind there. I had to put, you know, that to get it right. And so now, if you take a look at my bearings, they're slightly going upwards, and that's when the blade is running through it, is driving it up. And then and that was the thing that fixed my my blade from coming off. Other things you could check is, you know, because you got these guides here which do slide those bearings forward and back. So if you got smaller or bigger product, I kind of have mine set all the way back all the time. But driving that in, obviously you're making the bearing adjustment change. So check that as well. Yeah, make sure that these, I mean, when you got product in there, that will kind of push against that. And the guy did say, oh, you know, what I do is I just put something in there straight away and then start cutting, and that was holding it on there for him. Yeah. So when I was saying before about your bearings are driving the belt in its direction, this one here is got to go up, and this one here is also got to go up in that same direction. So that's why I put the spacer on the top here, and I put the spacer on the bottom there. So they're both in the driving up position. Yeah, I put spacers underneath this side to help kick this side up, which was enough to pull the blade backwards. Shouldn't have to do it, and probably all the other adjustments probably didn't need to do those either. It was probably mainly those bearings that needed adjustment. One of my other hates about this bandsaw, I do love it, but it's the base is so flexible. There's just so much movement in there, and I do intend on making another base, but I had this sign which I had from work, and I just popped a bit of that on there for temporary measures. But you know, moving it around, it seems to have held it in place enough. So I had some problems with my bandsaw. So what was happening is this little cover plate fell off, and then just started tripping out for some reason. So I decided to test it, and how I'm going to test it is I'm setting it up for this one here for continuity. Alright, I've turned the switch on. All I have now, so it's completing its circuit, and I'm just checking to see if it's, see it's beeping, so it's completing its circuit. Now I'm just going to check, make sure it's not earthing out on any of these connections onto the motor, which just seems good. So theoretically it should be, you know, I can't see no reason for it to earth out. But then I you know, still tested it and it was still earthing out. So a friend of mine said to set it for ohms, and so I'm setting it for 200k. Alright, and he said to check your positive and negative. I changed to 200m, and I checked it both ways as well, and I got a readout of 1.2, which I think is good. I think it's supposed to be between 1 and 3. Then because he said, well, because it's reading an ohms and it's not overload or zero, it should be okay. So he said the next thing to do would be to check the voltage, and I'm going to set it for maximum voltage, which is 750, and he said to check it from there to the motor. Which that means I think it's earthing out somewhere between there and the motor, because this is putting like a current through. So as you can see here, I've got it switched on and I'm about to turn it on. Runs fine. Alright, and the moment that I connect earth to like the frame or something, it just trips out. So my problem was that I decided to check over everything and I noticed this cover was sitting on loose, and so I took it off and gave it a clean out, and then what I did was I hooked this earth back up into here, and when I turned it back on, it tripped out. And I'm like, what's going on? And so I think what this person must have done, he must have had it hidden in here like so and wasn't touching anything, and I would come along and I've wired it back up and it trips out. So even though you can touch it and stuff while it was running, there was obviously some kind of short going on in here which wasn't significant enough for it to do anything, but it was enough for it to earth out, which is a no-no.